And somewhat controversial book called Zealot, and it's only controversial because it's a Muslim scholar. And Christians been writing about Jewish and Muslim things, but people have been upset that a Muslim would write about Christian things. Anyway, in his recent and somewhat controversial book, Zealot, Reza Aslan lays out the historic context in which Jesus is born, raised, and ministers. And though you may not agree with his conclusions or his arguments, he is, in his historic analysis, he is dead on in regard to laying out the social situation in which Jesus was born, lived, and died. You see, he points out to us that Jesus was born in a time of great convulsion and revolution. That Jesus was born in a time of Jewish occupation and Jewish anxiety at the aggression and oppression of the Romans. And that as such, for someone to rise up and be named the Messiah or the Christ was not unique to Jesus alone. There were many who claimed it and many who were named it. You see, there was an urgency, and there was an imminent need, and there was a desire for some kind of divine intervention that would remedy all the ills and finally bring a peace and a rule that got rid of the oppression and the pain that the Jewish folks felt. The difference between these messiahs that were numerous up and down the Galilee and down to the Dead Sea is that people like Judas the Galilean, or the one known as the Egyptian, or the one called the Samaritan, all said, the way you fight the Romans is the way the world knows how to do it, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. Take up the sword and rebel, which they did again and again. And then there is this other Messiah, this Jesus, who speaks in tones entirely different and says, no, that's not the way. You have to turn the other cheek. You have to forgive those who have wronged you. You must love your enemies. Very different views. And though there are many on one side, there is only one over here. Now, the Romans responded to both of these messages and both these styles of Messiah in exactly the same way. Roman authority met these kinds of messages swiftly with aggression and said, die. They crucified both sides. But what's interesting is few of you here have heard of Judas the Galilean or the Egyptian or the Samaritan. All of you have heard of Jesus the Christ. And so you must say, his message, curiously enough, though the least powerful, and the one that most people would not wager on in the world to win, is the one that has endured and the one that we still cling to. And I say cling because I honestly feel that this message is becoming harder and harder. This message of love and forgiveness and take care of your brother and be kind to your enemies, that this message is getting harder and harder. To speak of peace these days is not a popular thing. Because we live in a time and an age which, at least to me, feels like it's becoming increasingly violent. Every morning when I turn on the news, the first thing I'm usually greeted by is a bus driver beating up a student or wrestling with a student on a bus. A grandchild who has taken the life of a grandparent. Another random shooting somewhere in California or Colorado or Florida in a mall, a movie theater, or a school. Now we even shoot teenagers because we don't like their music. And the shocking part is that we have become so calloused or indifferent or self-justified in these actions that then we can return to our hotel and order pizza. Incredible. And yet the worst part, at least from my perspective, is that this seems to be becoming such a frequent occurrence in our life and our society that we don't even become incensed by it anymore. It's like we become anesthetized to it, numbed to it. We absorb it as though it's just another part of our daily diet. And some respond by saying, enough, enough, and push for arming people. Just last week alone, 2 states in this country have now made it legal for students with a permit to carry guns to school. I got to tell you, if I was a teacher, that's not a place I would want to teach. And so on the other side, we pass laws to limit the proliferation of gun, and yet we all know that a good percentage of the events that pain us so dearly in this country are committed by people who obtained weapons legally. It becomes so dire and so desperate some days that I just want to go to bed, withdraw into my own little world, and surround myself with my own little group of friends, and as best I can, as safely as I can, protect myself and live out my days. I mean, who doesn't get on an airplane and look at the people around you differently? But if we did that, if we all withdrew into our own little world as if we could, what would happen then? If everybody here just said that's it and went home, what would happen then? What would be left? You know, it might work for you, it might work for me, but what would it be like for the world we leave behind, for our children, our grandchildren, our neighbors either next door or around the world? And honestly, can I, will you, can you do that? Can you check out? Can you cease to care? Surely there's another response. Surely there's got to be a better way. And Jesus says, there is. Jesus says there is. It may cost you your life. It cost him his. But he says there is another way that can endure and can change things. And it begins not out there, but it begins in here and in here. It begins in here with us somehow believing that we still can love people into change. I mean, I don't know how many of you believe that truly, but Jesus says you can love people into change. You can't force people to change, but you can love them into change. You can forgive them into change. You can reconcile them into change. And I'm not referring to an approach that is a naive sense of forgiveness that ceases to hold all of us accountable. Nor do I believe that we can solve our problems in a day or a year or a month. I mean, it's been 2,000 years since Christ lived and died, and we are still wrestling with some of these. But I believe that we dare not allow the voices of hardness or vengefulness or aggression or anger be louder than those Christ has given us the message of hope and promise. We can never let the others shout so loudly that the darkness overcomes the light that is ours. That we dare not retract from our responsibilities to make a difference where we can, when we can, how we can, with a renewed sense of urgency. With a renewed sense of urgency. You know, these are the hard texts right now. These are hard passages. This is the Jesus we really don't want to listen to. Because in Jesus' message and in his mind, nobody gets off easy and nobody comes clean. You know, right here he says, you shouldn't come to church if you've got somebody you got a grudge against. So go out there and fix it and then come. You can't be right with God if you're not right with people. That's pretty hard to do because I wonder how many people are right with everybody in their life right now. You know? He says that if you have resentment or anger or hostile feelings, you've got to take care of those. You have to live a different way. You have to seek to make it right. Recognizing that your efforts may not work, but that doesn't relieve us from trying. That as a follower of a Christ, a disciple of a one who lays before us a different way, we have to try. So that so long as we respond to people in our lives, our communities, our homes, leaders in our country with disrespect, with ugly words, and let's not kid ourselves, words kill people as much as guns. We kill people's character. That as long as we respond in that way, we cannot expect others to learn an alternative, a different way to live, to care, to speak. These are hard words. And yet they cut to the core of who and what Jesus was about. You know, once upon a time, we used to think, I'd like to kill that person. Anybody here not had that thought? In some way? You know, boy, scratch you off my list. Which wasn't right, but we thought it. The difference is now people seem to think it's okay to act upon it. And I don't know if we can get the genie back in the bottle. I just know that Christ urges his followers to never give up and to always try. You know, someone was telling me about, who hasn't driven down Gulf Boulevard and had a thought or two? Somebody was telling me about someone cutting someone off and this kind of thing going on Gulf Boulevard, and the familiar hand gesture came out the window. The problem was the person giving the gesture didn't realize that the person she was giving it to was her mother. You know, every time we send people, you know, we watch the slides and we probably only think so much, oh, that's nice. But, you know, every time we send people into a foreign land, which a foreign land is really someplace other than what you're familiar with. Let's get that straight. Foreign lands are not necessarily overseas. Sometimes just going South St. Pete is a foreign land. Every time we send folks into what may be for us a foreign land, be it the hills of Nicaragua, where people were once taught that Americans were their enemies, or people of West Virginia and Appalachia, we're trying to change the world and show reconciliation, love, and forgiveness. Every time you respectfully enter into a conversation with someone of a different persuasion, you're seeking to change the world and make it a place of forgiveness, love, and reconciliation. Just like every time we model for a youth a different way of being an adult, we do the same. You know, the other day I was doing my familiar thing. You know, you just never know. The other day I was doing my familiar thing of going through Starbucks. And, you know, the Starbucks at Central and 66 is a horrible design, and they never should have allowed it to be there because the traffic patterns are just crazy. And I have literally seen people get out and throw things at people and act in all kinds of insane ways over a cup of coffee. Well, the other day I was there, and the usual pattern coming in off Central was all clogged up. Someone coming in from the backside wanted to cut in, and I'd been waiting there 10 minutes. By gosh, you know, I'm thinking to myself, you can wait 10 minutes. Let's have a confession here. We'll all come clean. And yet when I got up there, you know, I really didn't have anything to do. I stopped my car and let the person go in. And when I got to the window, he had bought my coffee. You know, there are these little acts of kindness that model a different way we can live. And it's not on the nightly news, and it's not going to change the world, but man, it makes a difference in someone's day. Over the years, I've been personally blessed to have all kinds of good role models. You know, coaches who taught me that there was more to sports than winning, and that there is a gracious way to lose and acknowledge someone who played better than you. Choir directors who channeled energies into constructive tasks. And I think of a preacher named Fred Edmonds who years ago in the early 80s, when I was first in ministry, had a church in Fort Collins, Colorado. Back when AIDS was far more scary than it is today to us. You know, the very word. You know, in my town, they wanted to tattoo kids who might have it so that everybody else could go the other way. And Fred, being in a university town at Colorado State University, had some graduate students in his church who were being deported back to Iran. The only problem is, because their visa had expired, the only problem is they had a young girl who by virtue of a blood transfusion, had contracted AIDS, and to go back to Iran, which the government said they had to do, that girl would be put to death. Because that's the law. And so Fred asked his congregation if anyone would take in this little girl till the parents could work it out and come back to the United States, and plea after plea, and no response. So Fred and his wife did it. And I remember seeing Fred take care of her, and I remember the last time seeing Fred take care of her, walking in a shopping mall at Christmas time with that little girl so sick she had to be carried in his arms. And he cared for her till she died. They're small things, but they are big things in the witness and the power of grace that they offer to us, reminding us that, we may not be winning the war all the time, but little battles are being won day by day. Because the truth is that and we forget this, the truth is that for every act of violence we see on TV, there are countless, probably tens of thousands of unnamed, unknown acts of forgiveness and reconciliation that are going on every day. And we have to remember those. We have to be a part of those. We have to take strength from those. They don't get top billing, but they are the real good news. Just look at your worship bulletin and think of all the mission activities this church does. It is an attempt to show a different way, to go into people's lives and in areas of need that say there's still people who care, there's still people who forgive, there's still people who want to make a difference. No matter what your life is, Christ says there's a different way. So what I am saying to all of you is, in this day and age of urgency, we must not and we dare not take this gathering for granted. Because what we do here and what we form here and what we go out to accomplish from here as the church shows the world there is a different path and people still care. That every Sunday as people come here, not just from up and down the beach, but from up and down and around the country and even the world, we receive and offer hope. We provide an alternative vision that says, you have heard it said of old by those out there that an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I tell you, it's a harder way, but there is another way, a better way, God's way, Christ's way. And we dare not stop sharing and seeking to live it. Because the bottom line is, if we withdraw and cease to share it, who will? Who will?